Vaishali, Manoj, welcome. Manoj, to you first. How are you seeing AI and Gen AI impacting networks today?
First and foremost, as you know, AI and Gen AI is transforming everything we know from customer care to how people write code, how people write unit testing, and every facet of life is changing. Specifically, in case of networks, it's fundamentally changing the things which we used to do manually. Everything is getting automated, everything is becoming more self driving. You get to figure out things before they happen, you find the problems before they happen, and pretty much 90% of the trouble tickets vanish because of the AI factors involved. So this is a genuine revolution which is happening in networks, because networks used to be incessantly complex before, tough to manage, tough to operate, everything. But that's going to become much more simpler with new AI driven products coming from companies like ours at Juniper Networks.
Vaishali, what are some of the key challenges that organizations face when it comes to Gen AI deployment? And I guess what can they do to overcome those?
It's a good question, Georgie, because as Manoj said, you can use it for on so many different fronts. But at least I find there are two, three things that differentiate what I call the leaders from the laggards. And I would say the first is picking a few focus areas. And I note I'm not using the word use cases, but domains that you really want to apply AI and Gen AI to and really make a difference there. That's, I would say, the first point. The second is it's not just about technology for technology's sake. Having some financial and operational outcomes is quite key. And we find that only 20% of companies actually do that within a time bound way. And the third is it is 10% about, the algorithms, it's 20% about the tech and so on, but it's 70% about driving the change. And if you don't drive the change, then you don't get really the impact. So in my mind, if we have these three things, it would make a big delta in whether it's a network or in any other domain that we pick.
I just want to pick up. Why were you so adamant about saying not use cases?
Because everyone defines use cases in their own way, and it can be this small or it can be this big, and you can then have a scatter plot across the whole organization, and then it loses the focus. So you'd rather pick a domain, and then whether it's two use cases, 10, 5, whatever, you really are revolutionizing or reshaping or reinventing a domain.
I would like to chime in a little bit, because use cases tend to focus you on a microcosm, because it's a defined thing. By definition, Gen AI and AI can relieve you from those, constraints. So if you look at the entire domain, you kind of look at a fresh way of doing things. Just because it was done certain way before, that's not the same way it's going to be done with AI. So that's the opportunity.
How can business leaders then balance the need or the desire for Gen AI innovation, but with sustaining critical network infrastructure? How do you make that balance?
In some ways, I think they are closely tied together. I think, like Vaishali said, if you embrace AI and Gen AI, especially, you start to think about things differently. So instead of thinking about your fundamental critical business problems completely separate from enabling AI and Gen AI, if you think of them together, you may have new ideas sprouting. Having said that, there is every business has some critical aspects they have to continue to do well at or maintain. But the more you embrace newer ways of doing things like Gen AI, you will find newer ways to tackle the same old problems. For instance, in our business at Juniper Networks, by embracing AI and especially Gen AI, now we have AI ops managing almost every aspect of the network flawlessly, which used to be done by hordes of people sitting in the network operating center and doing that stuff. So we simplified things, which means people are now freed up to do other stuff, better work, where they can use their intellectual horsepower better rather than doing the mundane work. So without actually combining the two, we wouldn't have been able to come out with those answers. So I would say think of them together as rather than think of them separately.
And from my perspective, I would say there is so many things that can be used and applied and solved that you don't have to go for your most critical part of the process and say, I'm going to apply AI and Gen AI there. There is so much else that can be first, adapted and revolutionized before you jump into, the most critical part. So in my mind, there is always a balance that can be found while still making great strides and moving forward.
Vaishali, Manoj, thank you so much.
Thank you.